All right. I have done this topic before, but I have not. I added some new information and some other things I've been researching. So if you have been on here before and you remember this, maybe some of it's a little familiar, but to tell you the truth, it's so long ago I did it, you probably forgot most of it, unless you have a really good memory, which some people do. But there is some new information that I have decided to bring into it tonight. So hopefully you'll notice that, but we'll see. Okay. Well, comes to politics, some believers don't want to talk about it. Some believers totally avoid it like the plague. They always say, don't talk about religion and politics. But as responsible citizens of the Messiah, we live in a world today, obviously, that where politics impacts several issues in our lives. I mean, it impacts a lot of things. So it's almost to our detriment to not even think about how our worldview convictions as believers impact the political process. And so I'm not here tonight to take a specific side. I'm not here to endorse a candidate. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just talking about um, some of the things that we need to remember as we go into another year of an election, and it's going to get very, very chaotic again, as we all know, and it always does. And there's a lot of conversations you're going to have with other people, a lot of family conversations or conversations with friends or coworkers. And, some of you maybe just avoid the topic. Maybe you have your own little group you talk to about it. Maybe you just don't say anything, or maybe you just don't think about it. I don't know. But I hope tonight that maybe you can take some of this information, use it over the next year, over the next several months, because this is happening quickly and it's all around us. So I hope that this is meaningful and you can make some applications. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about tribalism before we go right into politics, because tribalism is related to politics, and there is a serious issue with tribalism today, and that's where a lot of people just break up into groups. And we say, like, people are very tribal, like, oh, that's your tribe. Or not the Cleveland tribe, but that used to be the Cleveland tribe. But uh just this desire, or just this phenomenon where we tend to only stay within our tribe. We have identification or loyalty to a specific group or community. Now, in one sense, as believers, as Christians, we have a loyalty to our Christian community, to whatever. I mean, we're part of the universal body of Messiah followers all across the world, and it's certainly have loyalty maybe to a local congregation and our local fellowship. That's fine, but that's not really so much what I'm talking about tonight. But anyway, so there was a book that I've been reading. It's kind of a I don't agree with everything in it, but it's got some good points. It's called Truth Over Tribe, pledging allegiance to the lamb, not the donkey, the elephant. And in this book, they talk about the impact of tribalism, how it impacts our relationships, it impacts our levels of anxiety, it makes us anxious, it makes us sometimes make unnecessary enemies, and sometimes it just kind of blinds us to certain things, because we stay within our own tribe. Certainly it can be very insulating, and it's kind of like reaffirming to only hang out with those people that fully agree with you all the time and share your core convictions. But I think we probably know, as you get out into the culture, that not everybody shares your core convictions. And certainly people are very divided over the issue of politics. And we can get very tribalistic related, and when it comes to political issues, of course. Now, social media, of course, has made it a lot easier to be more tribal, because what we can do now is just find our little online community, or else our friends or whoever it is, look up people online who we think they help us to stay within our tribe. And sometimes it happens is we just stay in what we call an echo chamber, where We only engage with people who agree with us, and we don't really, we don't hear anything else. And this sometimes leads to kind of like an us versus them mentality. When you're always online, only dealing with the people that agree with you, or else they're obviously saying the other people's the enemy and they're the enemy, and you just split up into these tribes. I mean, social media just makes that problem even worse, no doubt about it. And that's not going away as long as social media is around. And it's interesting within this book, Truth Over Tribe, that they talk about a neuroscientist named Tanya Singer. And neuroscience, that's where they study the brain, obviously, and do a lot of brain research and psychology, a little bit mixed in with psychology too. But she talks about how there are what we call mirror neurons that fire in our brains. That there's certainly these neurons fire a certain way when we see people who are like us, dress like us, think like us, or share some sort of identity. And it's just part of it's neurologically, it's just there. Our brains react a certain way. And then when we see someone who's not part of our tribe, sometimes these mirror neurons just stop working. We don't do well with empathy. We don't empathize well with others or the other group. We just look at them in a totally different way. And we, we tend to have a hard time loving people right outside of our tribe, and we can sometimes tend to have some disdain for them. It's just part of it's neurological, the studies they're doing in neuroscience. It's kind of interesting. And I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but it's just kind of interesting. And also, when one of the things that leads to more tribalism certainly is a lack of trust, meaning that when trust really begins to diminish, tribalism flourishes. Because what happens is, just like what has happened in our country and elsewhere, people have lost trust in most of our institutions. We've lost trust, of course, in Congress and the role of the president and the FBI and the judiciary, the media, colleges and universities, big businesses, sometimes churches, even scientists, technology companies, labor unions, and of course, public health leaders. I mean, these areas that we have to function in these areas. I mean, they're part of our lives. We depend upon them to give us proper information, to lead and guide us, to protect us, even to help us live better lives, or maybe we serve in some of these areas. But unfortunately, the trust is really taken a hit in these areas. And so what happens is people just say, well, who can I trust? I can't trust anybody. But wait, I found a group or a tribe I can identify with, and I can trust them, and they trust me, and we all kind of talk the same language and we say the same things, and it's great. Yeah, but unfortunately, the trust in our institutions is getting worse and worse all the time. So the trust factor is certainly, the lack of trust has led to even more tribalism for sure. And there's also a lot of confusion, of course, over what is fact and what is subjective opinion. And I hope you guys know the difference, that when you talk about facts, a fact, that's an objective claim, something outside yourself. It starts outside. It's backed up by evidence, statistics, and data. Whereas opinion starts with you, your own personal subjective opinion. If I like chocolate ice cream, then and you like strawberry, that's a subjective statement. That's a preference, right? But facts are something that are independent of us, and our opinions don't influence the facts. And sometimes many people get these confused. So a lot of times we're having a hard time getting the right information, and there's a lot of what we call, they use the phrase disinformation, and so that kind of shuts down conversations sometimes. But just with the advent of the internet, it's just making it harder and harder to really trust what we're reading or trust what we're hearing. And people are just it's just sometimes they're saying they might go to their tribe and say, I think we've got hold of the facts and everyone else is wrong, or else maybe they think they've got facts and they're really just opinions. But this has become a real problem, as far as people trying to figure out what is true. How do I know this is the right thing to believe? Where do I get the information from? And it's an ongoing issue for sure. And another thing that the authors talk about that causes a lot of tribalism is a deficit of social capital. What they mean by that is because of the distrust in a lot of these institutions, there's a lot of people that they may have their tribe, but also they become very individualistic, very just turn inwardly, and they don't trust um, social engagement the way they used to. And obviously, as the statistics show, that we're the happiest and healthiest when we are socially wealthy, meaning that we have relationships, communities, and groups that we belong to that are healthy. That certainly helps us flourish as humans. We're not supposed to be totally alone, but we know that unfortunately, even though the call to have a social to have these relationships and have healthy groups and communities, unfortunately, sometimes lead to us, uh, still being very tribal as well, because we don't go outside those communities as well sometimes. And we, and some of us just turn very individual. Some people just turn very individualistic. Maybe they don't even join any tribe. Maybe they're just totally on their own and they're just like, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. I don't trust anybody else. I'm going to live a Lone Ranger life. I'm going to be lonely. And they just, because of an issue of trust, it's just hard to trust people, hard to trust social relationships, hard to trust communities. So that leads to a real challenge. But one thing for sure, I do agree with this from the book, their conclusion that is they say that we as humans have rejected God's vision of a worldwide human tribe where all people are understood as his image bearers and imbued with intestinal worth and value. And we tend, unfortunately, to forget that all humans are made in the image and likeness of God. What we do is we tend to just draw the tribal lines. We draw the lines ethnically, politically, socioeconomic lines, cultural lines, national lines. We tend to we just do it. I mean, it's just of course Marxism is a huge problem today because that puts people in all these different classes. And Marxism is the main religion being taught on college campuses these days. And so, if you want to divide a culture, I mean, certainly if people are going to be influenced by Marxist ideology, that's going to be a problem. But also, just in general, a lot of people, I don't expect an unbeliever to recognize people as created in the image and likeness of God, that we have that core common bond between all humans. But I would expect believers, professing Jesus followers, to remember that, right? And so, unfortunately, because of the fall of man and the sin in the world, we choose division over unity a lot of times. And that, of course, is the impact of the fall. And of course, Satan loves that. So we divide people up into different classes and we put them in certain categories, and we just tend to be very suspicious, right? We tend to label a lot of people. Um, I have no problem calling Marxism out as an ideology. If someone tells me they're a Marxist, then I got to be okay. Well, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to label them, but if they tell me they're Marxist, I'd say, well, I guess he's a Marxist. But they're still made the image and likeness of God, right? I just think they're mistaken. Now, remember in the New Testament that if you look at some of the interactions Jesus has with his audiences, it seems like they want him to pick a side. They're trying to figure out, are you with the Pharisees? You agree with the Pharisees? Are you going to agree with the Sadducees? You're going to sympathize with the Romans, the Zealots, or the Essene sect of Judaism, the Dead Sea Scroll community? But if you look at Jesus's ministry, he never really joined a specific tribe. What he ended up doing is just calling people to himself. from all different backgrounds, right? He ministered to Pharisees, to Sadducees, to Roman guards, to zealots, to all kinds of people, the down and out people, people that need healing. So Jesus never really did that. Okay. And so hopefully we can try to follow his example as the days and years go on, that to remember that we need to imitate him and remember that all people are welcome into his kingdom, of course, no matter what they, people may have weird beliefs and you may not agree with them, but if you can agree on who Jesus is and they do too, and they really understand the gospel, then you have certainly a starting place with them, right? And, I have people in my life over the years I've had some sharp disagreements with. I still do, but I have to keep putting them before God and realizing they are creating the image and likeness of God. And also, if they're believers, I'm like, well, my core thing with them, what we really have in common is who Jesus is. I've got to keep that at the forefront. Okay. Even if I think they're mistaken about some of their personal convictions or whatever they are. So this all leads to, what we do with politics. And I think that we know that human experience shows that politics impacts billions of people, right? We know that in some countries, bad political choices lead to dictatorship. Who don't care about the people can lead to starvation and poverty and mistreatment and death, even for hundreds of millions. And of course, good political decisions can lead to freedom, life, justice, and happiness and peace. I mean, politics impacts a lot of people's lives, of course. So it's all around us, whether we like it or not. Now, there's been a fair amount of books written on politics and what Christians are supposed to do with politics. You can get some of these books if you want them for starting points. They're all good. Some of these are more current than others, but they're all good starting points if you just want to be educated about how, as a believer, do I deal with the political system, because it is important. And this book is a little more recent. It's called Political Gospel, Public Witness in a Politically Crazy World, by a biblical scholar named Patrick Schreiner. And what he points out is that at the time of Jesus, they really didn't make a sharp distinction between the religious faith and politics. That just wasn't part of the culture. And he says here, Christianity is in this sense a politics, that Jesus is Lord, not just of individual believers, but of all creation. Christianity isn't merely a matter of personal spirituality, but it's also public truth. According to Schreiner, Christian politics concerns how we integrate our confession to Jesus with our call to love our neighbors. I'll expand on this a little more. So he says that Christianity, by definition, is political. The gospel, in a way, is a political announcement. Okay. And you don't, just like at the time of Jesus, we don't want to necessarily make religion and politics as completely separate spheres. They overlap. And what he says is that we don't need to be less political, but rather we need to be discipled properly. So we're appropriately political. Okay. And that's like what we're doing tonight. This is just trying to do some discipleship on how to think about this. Okay. Because I think we know over the years, Christians get called out for being too political. They get told that they should just keep their religion in the closet, keep their faith in the closet, keep it private, personal, don't bring it out in the public square. Or they get told that they get scolded for not speaking up enough or not having an impact in the world like they're supposed to have. If Christianity is really true, why isn't it having the impact it's supposed to have? Christians are too quiet and all they care about is dying and going to heaven, So it can go either way, but we get called out on both ends. And like I said, I don't think we can neatly separate religion and politics, because every aspect of culture, whether it be art, science, education, business, family, politics, is really everything's in the realm of God. This is his world. He created it. It's all his. Okay. And whether any of these areas, all these areas are definitely corrupted and misdirected by sin. No doubt about it. Sin impacts all these areas, and there's beautiful things in some of these areas that we just point out, but there's also really ugly things, right? And they all need to be restored, all need to be redeemed, as we say, and they're all in this world. So everything is owned by God, and he's called us to redeem every area of society. Okay, all areas need redemption. That's why when Nancy Pearcey wrote this book, Total Truth, a long time ago, seems like a long time ago, that she said that, we need to understand we have a worldview, and our worldview impacts all of reality. Okay, we don't just have this personal relationship with Jesus and we die, we go to heaven. That is just, that's not how you want to interpret the Christian faith. Okay. Yes, that's part of it, but it's not the only thing. And so we tend to really over spiritualize at times, and we don't understand that our worldview is how you view reality, and Christianity is a worldview. And our worldview speaks to the whole of reality. Okay. And so it is total truth, as she says. Okay. It impacts everything. So it is true that how we interact in the public domain in the world around us, especially in the political system, everything we do should be shaped by the gospel, no doubt. And it has to be shaped by both truth and love. So if you're going to try to be salt and light in the world around you, and you want to be engaged as an engaged Christian, an ambassador in the world, you have to aim at both truth and love. You can't, totally just aim at truth, because sometimes you'll just end up becoming a loudmouth amateur lobbyist, if you want to enter the political realm. Or if all you do is aim at love, then you could become a sellout. What you do is you just sell out your biblical convictions because you're so concerned about being accepted by others, so concerned about their opinion of you, so concerned about what the culture thinks about you, that at the end of the day, you've laid aside your Christian convictions because you're too worried about what the world thinks of you, right? So we need both. We need both truth and love as we engage the public square. And there's no doubt that Christianity has struggled to find a settled formal political philosophy. Christians have struggled with how to integrate politics into their faith for decades and centuries. There's been books written about it, and systems and philosophies proposed, but it's still a struggle to this day, no doubt about it. And so, yes, it's true that we have a hard time thinking and talking about politics. And in some cases, we know that some Christian churches are accused of being too political, but they pretty much kind of are eating and drinking and sleeping, thinking about politics all the time. Politics just dominates their lives. And then other churches obviously make no mention of politics. They're what we call apolitical. They just don't mention it. And I'm not here to endorse, no, I'm not trying to say that churches need to endorse a candidate and preach sermons on endorsing a candidate. That's not what I'm saying. I would say I think churches need to help Christians understand their worldview, like we're doing tonight, how worldview impacts their politics, right? How do you integrate your worldview with politics? Okay, I think Christians do need to be equipped in that area. So I think the church needs to be doing that. It's also quite evident that the Bible does not really offer a detailed blueprint for political life today. Okay, it offers a kind of a normative framework, but it doesn't really talk about the pros and cons of, a free market economy or globalism or multinational corporations or the environment. It's not like endorsing a specific model like capitalism or socialism. Sometimes we tend to think it is because we read into the text more than what's there. But, we just got to remember the Bible is not a book on every single aspect of how to handle political life. I mean, how to handle thinking about politics. It just doesn't do that. There's some things there, but it's certainly not a ton. Now, sometimes what Christians do, though, when it comes to certain issues, is we try to proof text and try to find verses in the Bible to support a position. Like if you are talking about immigration, if you think about it, sometimes people quote this verse, Exodus 23:9, out of context when Israel is called out to be the people of God, and God tells them, you shall not oppress a sojourner. You were once sojourners in the land, and don't oppress the alien or the sojourner. So some people think that can just be applied to the entire debate on immigration. Like we can just take that verse and there it is. It's settled. That is so wrong, and it's um so simplistic and just really just bad Bible reading and bad Bible interpretation, bad application. So just don't do that. Try not to do that. Don't pick little verses to try to support your political views, one little verse. Now, of course, people make this mistake too. We've done this for years where we try to fit Jesus into one or the other. It doesn't work because Jesus didn't really, those categories didn't exist at this time. And he was not running around talking about this, right? Like, hey, come with me. I'm with this side or that side. But we've tried to do it on both sides and it just doesn't work. So I highly hope you're not doing that. Um, every election, though, it happens every election where Christians just go at each other with a vengeance and talk about which party is more Christian or which party has more Christian values or which party is more character or which party is this or that. And it's just really, it's funny to watch, to be honest. But I mean, I understand what they're saying and I have my own convictions, but it's just funny to see the sparring between. It's sad, but sometimes to see the debates between Christians over this issue. And in some cases, for sure, Christians, one of the approach Christians take is just do evangelism, don't do any politics. All that matters is we should just preach the gospel. That's the only way we can get people to change because the issue is at people's hearts. And politics isn't going to change anyone's heart. So we need to just preach the gospel. And who cares about politics? And I understand the sentiments with this, but you can't really just like withdraw from the political process and just do evangelism. It is true that evangelism does change the heart. I mean, the gospel changes hearts, but still, I don't think that view is totally accurate. And then we have people, of course, that think we just need to share the good news because we're only here temporarily and we need to get people's souls saved, and heaven is a better place, and this earth is yucky and ugly and demonic and evil, and there's problems, and it's fallen and broken, which it is. But we need to just get focused on getting people to heaven, right? And so sometimes, when if we say like do evangelism and no politics, or we have this kind of view here. It tends to kind of view this dualism that earth, everything about the earth is bad, and all we need to do is get to heaven. And that's the real important place. So if you haven't noticed, if God wanted us all to be in heaven, he could take us there right now if he wanted to. But he chooses to leave us here, chooses to leave us here for now, depending on how many years we have on this earth. But there's a reason why we are here still. As far as I can see, we're all here. We have to live here in this world, right? And then, of course, some people think, maybe we should engage all politically. We're all going to be raptured, whatever you believe about that kind of similar thing. But here's the deal. So we live in a tension because we live as what we call eschatological people. I've talked about this before, where eschatology is a study of the end times, but when Jesus comes, he begins the kingdom. The kingdom has come. The kingdom is broken into humanity, right? Jesus inaugurated the kingdom of God. And this has started in this present age, right? Jesus started it when he died and rose from the dead, right? He said, repent, the kingdom of God is here. Now, it's not fully completed yet, because if you look at that middle part, the already but not yet, at the end of time, at the consummation, as we say, that's when Jesus returns and the physical kingdom comes on earth. It's the restoration of everything. So we live in this tension. In this middle part is eschatological people, the already but not yet. And we're kind of like, some of us, I think perhaps sometimes we're saying, oh, I don't really, it's weird. I feel this tension because, I'm trying to be engaged in this world, and, but I'm trying not to be overly engaged. Like I'm too hung up on being here because this is kind of a temporary thing. And, I'm going to be in heaven one day, and then Jesus comes back and sets up his earthly kingdom. So I don't want to get too pulled in here. But then the other hand, you don't want to be so far heavenly minded, you're just not engaged at all in this world, right? So we live as both citizens of earth and heaven, right? We have obligations to the government and to God, okay, because we live in that tension. And Jesus didn't say necessarily we have to live with divided loyalties to government and church. We have obligations to both. Now I'll talk about how sometimes we get out of the priorities get messed up there in a minute or a little later. But the point is, we live as citizens of earth and heaven. We're here in this world. We have to engage this world, and until Jesus comes back, whenever that is, or until we're taken out of this world, we have to be engaged in this world. So that's just the way it is. Um, and think about it when we talk about people doing good works. We talk about good works proves your faith. If you don't have works, it shows you don't have true faith. And should we teach people how to be good citizens or do good works in hospitals and schools and businesses and neighborhoods, but not in government? Why would that be excluded from having influence, in that area, right? Because we're called to do good works to give glory to our fathers in heaven. So people would see what we do and they'd point to the one true God, right? So certainly, government isn't excluded from that, right? And we're called to love our neighbors ourselves, of course. And so if we're going to love our neighbors ourselves, we're going to need to realize that politics impacts our neighbor. Okay. And we're called to seek the good of our neighbors. So that means we strive to do everything we can to bring about good government and good laws. Now, some of us here, I mean, most of us are probably not in government. Maybe we have governmental positions. I don't know all of you on this call. Maybe we have been involved in some aspect of government, but there's some people that are there doing it full time. God has his children in certain positions, but we're called to certainly know what's going on and be engaged and vote. I mean, because these laws that will be passed once you vote for someone will impact your neighbor. Okay. So to sit back and say, I don't need to vote, I don't care, you're not really loving your neighbor. Okay. You are not really thinking about how those laws are going to impact their lives. Okay. And just a couple other views, kind of way to think about them. Some people say maybe we should just do all politics, not do personal evangelism. And this kind of was like the social gospel movement, where people thought if they just change the laws and culture through changing government and social programs and things like that, that would be the thing to do. Not so much on personal one-on-one conversations. It's mostly through social gospel movements. And that was, of course, very popular in liberal Protestant churches. I know a friend of mine is teaching a class in a church, and the guy raised his hand and said, I don't care about any of this. I just want to know how we can feed the poor and help the homeless. And the teacher, my friend said, well, your pastor asked me to come here to teach on the prophets. So I don't know what you want me to do, but I'm going to teach on the prophets. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be talking about the prophets. Okay. So anyway, some people just don't, they get out of balance and think it's, like, we need to definitely do those things, help the homeless and feed the poor, but we also need to do personal evangelism, right? Sharing the gospel with people. And then, some Christians certainly will see that politics is important, that voting matters, but Christianity is something that stands opposed to this. And, they just look at politics as being idolatrous. Now, politics are worldly. They view politics as worldly, right? It's a worldly thing. And it is true that politics can become idolatrous, as I'll talk about, but um, I think that we need to have that balance. Like I said, that we need to be engaged without making it into an idol, as I'll talk about. There's a balance there. And then some people just have politics as like part of their civil religion, of course. That Christianity is more of like a civil part of like just being part of a good citizen, and Christianity's just part of the culture around us, and it's has to do with patriotism, or all those things go together, right? It's all one big package, and so that can happen with some Christians as well. Now, another view that's out there is what we call theonomy, or what we call Christian Reconstructionism or dominion theology, and this gets certainly a lot of criticisms. And this is where Christians believe that because when Genesis talks about God telling man to have dominion over the earth, that means that we really should have dominion over every area of society. Now, it is true, like I said back at the beginning, that when Nancy Pearcey says total truth, that our worldview is part of everything. That is true. We don't want to forget that. Christianity is part of the whole world. I mean, it impacts everything, but some of these people think that we've got to get, Christians need to hold office in all areas and government. Until we do that, we won't have the country we need. We have all Christian leaders, all Christian presidents, all Christian governmental leaders, Christians everywhere. And they think that the laws in the Old Testament and the Torah, or the law, the Mosaic law, should be the pattern for civil laws today. Okay, and of course that's going to get pushback from a lot of course, non-believers, but also pushback from Christians. So, this kind of can get a little mixed in with the concern, the rap of Christian nationalism. The Christians who supposedly, worship their country, seen as like worshiping their country, and it's just a pejorative term, really. So we need to have a balance here, of course. I don't think we're called to have dominionism, though. Like, that's the view we need. Kevin DeYoung, he's a well-known pastor. He's written a lot of books. He says we need an approach to politics that is engaged but not idolatrous, transcendent but not relativizing, culture shaping but also constrained, supportive of a broader Christianity, infused tradition, while also insisting that Christ is our first love and not that tradition. That's a pretty good quote. I like that quote. I think he has like 20 kids. Every time I see him, I think he's adopted a lot of kids. Good for him. There's a book by John Nugent called Endangered Gospel. He wrote back, I got this book a ways back, but he said that sometimes what we do is we tend to think that Christians think they've got to fix everything in this world, every single problem, which we can't. But then we kind of have this problem where we engage to the point we think we need to fix every single problem in the world, or else we just or the other side, we just completely abstain from it. We don't do anything. And what he thinks is that God has made us stewards of the good news, that we live in a worldly system, and there is evil in the worldly system. There's evil in rulers. There's nations with rulers that are evil, and we live in it. But we are stewards of the good news, and we have to be proclaiming the good news. So I believe God's made us stewards of creation. I just think what he's saying is that we tend to think we can fix every single thing. Now, some Christians that are really anti, I guess how do I say it? Some Christians that are really into, I guess, kingdom now theology, maybe that everything is now. Like, I believe it's now, but future too. sometimes we tend to think we can fix everything in this world, we can make it into utopia, right? And of course, some believers try to do this. We try to make the world into utopia, try to say, well, just change the entire world. We can fix all the problems through technology and science, and we can fix everything. And that's just hasn't worked, and it still doesn't work, and it's not going to work, okay? Because as long as you have fallen people in a fallen world, it's never going to happen. So we don't need to worry about trying to fix every single problem in our country or world. They're very complex issues, and yeah, we can try and be engaged, but we probably will realize we simply can't do it all. And this world is filled with very, very complex issues. Um, Michael Brown says his book, The Political Seduction of the Church. He says we must never forget that the political armor of our work will always be fleshly. It will always be a mixture of believers and unbelievers. It will always be corrupted by power and personal ambition and greed. That's why we must never put our full trust in the political system or a party or a candidate. Politics has its place, but it's not the kingdom of God. To the extent we get in bed with it, we're making a deal with the devil. Okay, and that's a guy that's pretty engaged politically. I know that. Now, it is true that many unbelievers or secularists, they always have feared a theocracy. That means where the government and religion are one, like they're totally merged together, like in Islamic countries, those are theocracies, like in Saudi Arabia. So these other countries, Islam and the government are completely merged together. Okay. And it's true that our country wasn't founded on a theocracy. The founding fathers did not make it a theocracy. Um, we don't want people being forced to be Christians because the gospel is not forced, right? We don't want everything Christianized by force. We want people to make the freedom choice if they don't want it. If they don't want God, they don't have to have God. If they don't want the gospel, they can reject the gospel, right? There's consequences for that, of course, but we don't want it. I mean, most Christians don't want a theocracy. I prefer a country that has freedom of religion. I don't want people being forced to believe in Christianity, and I don't want Christianity imposed through the wrong means, the wrong avenues either, using the wrong tools. Now, controversial question: does God need a president who fully embraces Jesus to accomplish what he wants? It doesn't seem to be biblically that God says that anywhere. If you read, of course, there's no president in the Bible, but nothing the Bible says that people must be believers before God would use them to advance his purposes. You notice that throughout the Bible, God uses Pharaoh to raise Joseph to a position of authority, right? That saves his people from a famine, right? We know Pharaoh was as fallen as could be. He was Pharaoh. We know that he uses Nebuchadnezzar to protect and raise up Daniel and his Jewish friends to positions of high authority over Babylon. He used King Cyrus. He even calls Cyrus an anointed one. That's the word for Messiah. Now, Cyrus wasn't a Messiah, but he has had a messianic, he had an anointing like a God anointed him to accomplish something by restoring the Jewish exiles to their homeland. God used Cyrus, king of Persia, to do that. We know that God, the peace enforced by the secular Roman Empire, to enable the first believers and missionaries to travel freely and spread the gospel, right? God used the secular Roman Empire. So, there's nothing that says, that God has to have a perfectly godly, honoring, Christ-following man to accomplish his purposes, at least biblically speaking. Sure, I mean, he can use that person, and maybe he does, but I'm just saying biblically he uses all kinds of people to accomplish his purposes. So, it comes to voting, should you vote? Yeah, I think you should vote because your vote does impact people's lives, right? And I talked about loving your neighbors yourself, and vote. People lay down their lives for your freedoms, and so to say that it's irrelevant and I'm just going to punt out of it is kind of like a slap in the face of all those that gave you your freedom to begin with. Okay. Now you do what you want. I'm just saying I think that you need to really think about that seriously if you just completely punt out of it every time. It doesn't matter. Um, I think that you need to just think about that very, very carefully. Okay, so what about the purpose of civil government? Well, the purpose of government is certainly to administer the justice system. And yes, it's secondly, one of the huge roles of government is to protect the integrity of our borders. Did you know that a country without borders isn't even a country? How about that? So to have an open border and get rid of borders means there's no more US. Okay. And so just let it be said. I said that. Okay. So for those that think that it's no big deal, that that's the compassionate thing just to have open borders, you really need to think about what you're saying. Okay. Because biblically speaking, yes, God loves all people from all across the world, and we need to have love in our heart towards all people from all different backgrounds. But we have laws, and those laws are there for a reason. Okay, there's a process that's set in place. You're not being compassionate by saying just get rid of it and just let everybody in and overrun our cities and education systems and healthcare systems and have no system in place to handle the situation and just let it go because that's a compassionate thing. That is not good critical thinking. Okay. And so, by the way, there's nothing that says that the purpose of civil government is to feed and clothe and shelter everyone either. Okay. We do that now. I'm just saying, I think the church should probably take up that role, to be honest. But, if you're going to keep a border open, and now that we have more than 10 million people reported illegally entering the United States since January 2021, we will cease from being a country, okay, because we won't have any borders, okay? And so that's something you really need to think about when you're voting. How does an open border impact your neighbor? Is it hurting? Is a compassionate side saying, I need to be compassionate? Is that hurting other people? Okay. Is that hurting other people who have, and what about all the people that came here legally that went through the system for years and years and years, waited and waited? Friends of mine that had to wait 4 or 5 years. So we have a very, very serious problem going on. And I hope that you're thinking and praying about it because this issue is impacting a lot of people. Okay. Like I said, God loves all these people, but they've got to come in legally. Okay. That is totally non-biblical for them to come in illegally. Okay. So you can't reconcile those two things. Okay. I mean, you can't reconcile them and say, well, I need to be compassionate, but that means they need to come in illegally. You're not thinking biblically. Okay. So that's my only big political statement this entire presentation because it's something that I spend time researching. And also another purpose of government is to protect and secure your God-given rights. Okay. If you notice in Declaration of Independence, when it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and happiness. You notice it says that these truths are self-evident and they are endowed by our creator. Okay, so obviously there's a relationship between human rights and God. How about that? Did you know that? So when people want to fight for human rights in every area, talking about women's abortion rights, saying everyone is equal, you want to get out there and fight for same-sex marriage rights, taxpayer provided health care, whatever it is, whatever your big thing is. Of course, people fight for transgender rights. We want to fight for the right for someone who has gender dysphoria, a psychological problem, to be able to mutilate their body. We want them to have the right to do that. We want to fight for children to have the right to do that, to not be able to have to tell their parents if they want to transition at age 16 or 15 or 14, to go ahead and treat a psychological problem by changing their appearance and ruining their body, then because they need to be happy and that's all that matters, then if you want to fight for those rights, transgenders' rights, my question is, where do rights come from? Okay, you want to push another bill through, Trans Bill of Rights, there's another human rights thing. Remember, a right is that which a person has a just claim to, a privilege that belongs to a person by law, nature, or custom. Okay? All rights come from an outside source. They have to be grounded in something. If there's no outside source grounding rights, and it's just your opinion, you can say that, I'm going to fight for transgender rights. And if I say, well, where do rights come from? You say, well, they deserve rights. I mean, they're human. That's not answering the question. What grounds those human rights? Where does that come from? Okay. I mean, if you're going to argue that the laws are the basis for your rights, actually, they're not. Okay. Human laws only recognize the God-given rights that were laid out there, as I just mentioned. If they, if a dictator changed the law, if that's the case, if your law is a basis of rights, that means that if a dictator, someone changed the law, you have no rights, right? Just like if you think government is the basis for your human rights, then basically, if government took away your rights, then you have no rights. If it's relying on government, so government gives you no rights, well, government takes them away, I guess you have no human rights, right? So the point is, without God, human rights amount to no more than your subjective preference. Okay, you can fight for the rights to intentionally kill children, abortion, that's what that is, intentional killing of an innocent human being. You can fight for the rights for same-sex marriage and transgenderism and all this stuff, but if God doesn't exist, those are just your personal preferences as to what rights are, and they're not grounded in anything. They can be taken away right away. They can be taken away instantly. Stevie Nicks, Fleetwood Mac, lead singer. As you know, she's in the band Fleetwood Mac, well-known singer. When back in the last election, she said she was worried about health care for women, basically abortion rights. But she said here, I'm really worried about your God-given rights. That's interesting. She says, I'm really worried about your God-given rights. And then when she's worried about Roe versus Wade would change their lives. So here it is. She's saying they have God-given rights and worried they're going to be taken away. So she's saying God gives us basically, if her rights come from God, she's basically saying she wants God to give you the right and to recognize the right for you to kill an innocent human being. I guess that's what she's saying, because if her rights come from God and she's so pro-abortion, then that's what she's saying. So it makes no sense whatsoever. Every political decision of any significance is grounded in fundamental beliefs about morality and the nature of persons. All laws that get passed are taking a moral position, okay? And we learn about, of course, divine law through the Bible. That's God's special revelation. We learn about natural law. We don't even need the Bible to know some things are morally right or wrong. They're embedded in the world of nature. They're part of the natural order, okay? So let me go forward here. So what you want to realize is when you vote, these laws are going to be passed. Government hopefully should be passing laws for the good of society and what's best for future generations. Okay. And the foundation of any good government or culture depends on moral commitments, and every law legislates a moral position. So when someone says, you Christians need to stay out of public square, you need to stay out of government, stop trying to impose your morality on everything. Well, all laws legislate morality. The question is, which morality? Is it going to be secular morality, your morality that is godless? You know what I mean? Every law legislates a moral position. There's no law that doesn't legislate a moral position. So don't buy into when they say you need to keep your Christian convictions out of lawmaking. I don't need the Bible to tell me that at conception a new life is formed. Okay, so the embryology textbooks tell me that you receive your entire chromosome set and that your entire genetic code, and that it's a new human being at conception. So I don't need the Bible to tell me that. So if you want to pass a law saying somebody has the right to kill that new human being, that's a moral position. But don't tell me that I don't have a right to vote for something that's the opposite, because they're all moral positions. Okay. And people who did have followed Jesus and got influenced in government or got involved with government have um had some positive have had a positive impact. If you study history, and in some cases they were involved with politics or government. They outlawed infanticide, child abandonment, and abortion in the Roman Empire. um they outlawed some of the punishments of branding the faces of criminals. We've been involved with instituting prison reforms. Um, we have outlawed pedophilia in some places. We stopped the practice of human sacrifice among the Irish, the Prussians, and Lithuanians, as well as among other nations. We helped grant property rights and protections to women. Of course, we got involved with stopping the burning alive of widows in India in 1829, outlawing the painful and crippling practice of binding young women's feet in China in 1912, persuading government officials to begin a system of public schools in Germany in the 16th century. Uh, of course, many of the American abolitionists in the mid 1830s were people who were Christians. The American Civil Rights Movement resulted in outlawing racial segregation and discrimination, led by Martin Luther King, a Christian pastor, of course, as we know today. We're celebrating that. Um, these are all people who are influenced by had Christian influence. Alvin Schmidt writes about that and how Christianity changed the world, by the way. Um, when you go to vote, obviously you have to ask, do the laws that they're going to propose, do they match any of my values? Obviously, it's hard because we know that laws have to get passed by the Senate and the House. These laws that get proposed, and it goes through a long process. Either the House approves it and the Senate doesn't, or the Senate approves it and the House doesn't, and then maybe they both approve and they don't. It's hard. But laws, all laws can do is really be deterrents. Okay, they have a teaching function. They tell people if something's legal or legal right, and whether something is morally right or morally wrong. We know that they're not going to ultimately change the human heart. They're deterrents, right? But they do save lives at times. But we know that if you can pass all the laws you want, but some people are still going to do what they want to do, obviously, with the issue of humans and sin. So I'm not saying laws are the answer, but laws can be good deterrents. And so merely passing good laws and having good government will never be enough to change a society. Of course, we know that Israel had good laws from God. Those laws did not keep them from sinning, and eventually they had judgment, right? And we obviously need to realize that winning elections is not enough to change a nation, of course. So uh, also remember religious freedom. Of course, elections sometimes have to do with religious freedom. We know that North Korea, it's severely persecuted. We know that Christians are killed there. There's no there's not any religious freedom. We know that North Korea sends out zero missionaries. We know South Korea has religious freedom, is growing and thriving. There's all kinds of countries like this. Some of them allow more religious freedom than others. So elections have to deal with that as well. We know that God instituted government for the good of all people. We know that human government is a derived authority, right? We know that people in authority are described as servants of God, and those who reject governmental authority reject God's authority. We know that civil government acts as God's agents of justice. We know that. Just some basics. We know that we are to be subject to government and obey its laws. We're called to pray for our leaders. pay taxes, respect and honor governmental leaders, which is hard to do, I know. Just some basics there. And then we come to idolatry, where it is true that people, the Bible teaches everyone is really inescapably religious. Okay, so even if you do not worship another deity, like you're worshiping another god from another religion, whatever you're doing, if you embrace someone or something that's the ultimate thing, that's your God. Okay, if you view this thing that sits on the throne of your heart, commanding your loyalty, shaping your life, that is your God. Okay, and I would say that if you don't have God in your life, and God, you're just an accident of nature, then I would say politics or another ideology can easily be your savior, right? What else do you have? Politics would have to fix everything. Okay, politics is about it. Um, because if you look at your worldview, if God doesn't exist, you are your own God, and you come from purposeless evolution, right? And you're just going back to dust and death. Eventually, we just die out. The human race dies out, and we're here just to propagate the species. As a whole, the universe is purposeless, and you come from a purposeless process, and you're just here temporarily, and you're trying to survive. And all you can do is cling to government to help you. Government has to change everything, because what else is going to change? I mean, you could turn to an ideology. You could make any of these things into ideologies, and I mean, these ideologies could become idols. You could turn to these ideologies; they become idols. If you think that you're going to change the world through Marxism, which they're trying to do in the college universities, or communism, or socialism, or just capitalism alone, or liberalism, conservatism, whatever it is, these ideologies can become idolatrous as well. Okay. But if you look at the current country, like some signs that you're going to fall into political idolatry, here's some signs. If every election, like we always do, when someone wins, we say America's done, it's all over. That's probably a sign that you're putting way too much stock in a candidate, okay, to fix all the problems of our country, which they never can do. Or if you say so and so wins, Jesus must be coming soon, we're living in the last days. Or you could say if so and so wins, God's bringing judgment on America. Or else, unless you think you get the perfect biblical candidate, God can't accomplish his work. So there's just some signs where you're really putting way, way too much stock in a candidate to fix all the problems in our country, which they can do. Or else, back to the tribalism. If you constantly distance yourself from someone who sees you, who has different political views, like another Christian, then that can be a problem, right? Defriend them or break fellowship. Um, you spend more time identifying them as a liberal or conservative, or else you yourself, maybe you do that. Or else you just vilify someone who disagrees with your political views. Now, I have Christians all across the spectrum. I have Christians that are Democrats, Republicans, far right, far left, in the middle. And I have sharp disagreements with some of them, but I try to keep at the forefront the fact, if they really, I know they're truly in the faith and they really know the Lord, that's the thing we have in common. Because people vote, a lot of times people just vote the way they're raised. It's all they know sometimes. And it's like they've been told it's a sin in their home growing up if they vote anything differently. And that can happen. And then other times, it's just an issue of ignorance. You just don't know. And other times it's just a matter of just not putting much thought into it, right? I'm just going to do this or vote this way. But one or the other, we have to remember, if someone is a believer, that's our commonality with them, right? And also, if they're not a believer, you still shouldn't do that. Like completely vilify someone and cut them off, because that person you may be the only connection that person to have a relationship with God, right? And of course, we do and have had a problem with identity politics, where, like I said, if you don't have God in your life, politics becomes the forum for which we seek meaning. People go to politics to express their identity. And Once again, they think politics can fix all the problems of the nation or the world. There was a woman, I don't know if you remember Kirsten Powers. She's not so much on the news anymore, but she said that one point when she was not a Christian, she became a Christian actually through Tim Keller's church, which is really cool. And Tim Keller is a famous pastor who passed away last year, but she's an atheist, and she just said, listen, my democratic politics was my religion. So my whole life centered on democratic politics. She was in that bubble, she said. And that can happen with anyone in any political spectrum, of course. I mean, she said that was my religion. I mean, if you don't have a Lord in your life, that's kind of what your hope is in for some people. That's what you got to, center on. Okay. And, hopefully, like I said, we try to stop seeing people primarily through a political lens. We should hopefully first see them as image bearers of God. And it can be hard. I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, there's people that you may have a sharp disagreement with, and you may say, wow, I don't know how they arrived to where they are. I don't know how they got there to believe that, but I still have to view them as an image bearer of God. We also need to remember that, of course, we're in a spiritual battle. Our battle is we wrestle against flesh and blood. The people are not the enemy. It's the ideologies. It's the worldviews and the strongholds that exist in people's minds. This battle is really in the invisible realm. As Darrell Bock says in his book Cultural Intelligence, he says, for decades the church fought a culture war where we often made other people the enemy. But this core biblical text, he's talking about Ephesians 6, the part about spiritual warfare. He says, but this core biblical text on engagement reminds us that a real battle is spiritual, requires spiritual resources, and we are armed with those in response to the conflict. Very true. Okay. We are in a major spiritual battle in our country, no doubt about it. I mean, in the world as well. Okay. So let me wrap this up with this. When you go to vote this year, just some tips. I'm not endorsing a specific candidate here, just some tips one way or the other. Just remember, as you probably know, that all candidates are flawed and sinners because politics is a flawed system and there's flawed people. Yes, there's corruption everywhere. As I say, yeah, politics is a process that involves fallen and sinful people. If you're going to get in that debate over which is more important, character or platform, neither side has perfect or good character. I don't think they do, and they probably never will. Some are worse than others, of course, but just think about, I hope that when you vote, you just don't vote on personality alone. I really hope you think about the policies you're voting for in the platform, okay? Because that platform and those policies impact people's lives, okay? The things that they endorse, okay? The things that they're going to do. And so you just need to ask, can I support a platform or policies that violate my worldview and Christian conscience? And you'll have to work through that. But there's no way you're going to get a perfect candidate or a perfect party for what you think is Christian or whatever. It's just never going to happen. But at the end of the day, I just hope that you'll think clearly through how that platform or those policies are going to impact people's lives. So, because that's your neighbor. And that's all I really have to say. So I will stop there. We got through this painful